Rodafleming in the Philippines here. How are you all again? I'm going to do something lighter. Many people have to ask me, it's a regular thing, why are there so many ladyboys in the Philippines? Before we go any further, I will point out to those Americans who definitely need help with their manners that ladyboy is what the people here who were born male but who appear to be girls but who are also preoperative call themselves. Okay? They call themselves ladyboys. Right? I've got loads of friends like this. My beloved girlfriend, who is a total darling, is a ladyboy. She calls herself a ladyboy. For her, it sums up exactly what she is. She's born a boy, but she's a lady. Okay? So get over it and stop trying to export your USican notions. They're nasty. Anyway, why are there so many ladyboys in the Philippines and across Southeast Asia? There's vast numbers of them. Well, I've been researching this for quite a few years, as you know, and it's interesting because what we find is that transsexual culture, transgender culture if you like, has been here since the dawn of time. It's really old. There are tribes, in Indonesia there's a tribe called the Bugis, and they have 5 genders. They notionally have 5 genders, but these genders are man-born male, man-born female, woman-born female, woman-born male, and all at once. So actually there's only 2 genders. It's just how you got there, you know. There's men and women, but some men were born female, and there's just men and women, but some women were born male. Okay? And this is a traditional society, a traditional culture that is, you know, we don't know when this first arrived, but it's thousands of years old. And the same is true of many other tribal cultures in this part of the world, that you'll find that this fluidity of gender is really normal. It's not considered strange. And if you actually look inside the cultures themselves, you'll find that exactly the same groupings happen. You get the homosexual and non-homosexual transitioners. I don't want to go into this too much just now, but let's look at this in terms of its history. When the Spaniards first came to the Philippines, one of the things about the conquistadores is that they had priests with them. Now the priests were partly there to convert the locals, but they were mainly there as clerks and reporters. The idea was that the Pope had given the King of Spain the right to colonize various parts of the world, but the Pope wanted his money. He wanted 1/10 of all of it. That was his tithe. And the priests were there to record all of the goods that were stolen by the conquistadors to make sure that the correct percentage went back to the king, because the priests didn't work for the king, they worked for the Pope. But incidental to that, because priests were all educated men, and they all were educated, and they all were men, in case anybody out there is in any doubt of how the Catholic Church works, they took notes about just the things they saw. And one of the things they noted was that many of the rebellions, especially those in the region of Iloilo, were actually led by what they called men dressed as women. Now this is talking about the 16th century here. And it takes very little reading around this to discover that this is really just pejorative. What they were dealing with was trans women. Why was that? Well, there's a thing called an albulario. Now, albulario is like a witch doctor. It's like a shaman, right? In traditional Filipino society, these would be trans. They would be born male, but they would be trans. And they would normally be married to the head of the tribe or the clan, right? So this pairing existed. This was the male but presenting female who was in charge, if you like, of the spiritual world, and the man who was in charge of the temporal world. And there is then a question is, how did he or she, how did the king reproduce? Well, some places they had multiple wives. The marriage was only ceremonial. There's various ways they got around this. But it's very common for the albulario to be the transsexual wife of the chief or king of a particular region. And this was known right up through the 19th century until it still exists now today. And we have transgender politicians here in the Philippines. There's a lady called Geraldine Roman, who's a transsexual. I don't know what her status is pre or post-operative, but I know she's an elected politician. I've encountered headmen of villages in in Thailand, as well as in the Philippines, who are trans. It's just not a problem here. There's a space, there's a social space there. Now, the disconnect for me appeared to be that which happened between the village level and the city level. You go to any village in the Philippines and you'll find some trans girls and trans boys. They're all over the place, and nobody bats an eyelid. It's like, well, that's the way he is, and you live with it. And you'll find, I've said this before, that Filipino youth life tends to revolve around the basketball court, and if it's a dual-purpose basketball court, then one side of the bleachers will be for the basketball, and one side will be for the volleyball. And boys don't play volleyball, girls don't play basketball, right? And that's your basic social division right up front. So on the volleyball side, you get all the girls and all the ladyboys, and the guys are all on the other side doing the basketball. And this division exists at the lowest level, well, not the lowest is the wrong word, but the most simple level of Filipino society, and that's replicated across the region. So what about when we come into towns? Because we now know that in cities, you see a lot of ladyboys here. I can't go out the door, but I bump into some ladyboys. Seriously, this is not like the West, It's not like, you're going to spend a long time or have to go to a particular part of a weird city somewhere to find some actual ladyboys. And by the way, I'm not talking about the transgender silliness that has appeared. That's a function of postmodernist feminism. It's got nothing to do with real transsexualism. But here you go out and you'll find real transsexuals. All over the place. Everywhere. Every day I go out, I'll see one or two. And I don't live in a red light area or anything like that. Just ordinary area here. When I go up city, I'll see more, but there's plenty around here. So what's happening here? Well, the first thing that happened is that when people moved into the cities, they brought their village habits with them, right? Filipino villages Filipino suburbs, Filipino neighborhoods are really like Filipino villages. It's very similar. Everybody sits out. I live in a small suburban street, and all of the houses have yards out the front. The yards have big gates. But normally, these gates are open, and the families will be sitting outside communing. And it's actually funny because I'm a Westerner. There's an older Western guy up the road there, but we kind of don't do that, which kind of makes us weird because the rest of them, they're all out there talking to the street. The street is alive, And interestingly, some Sikhs who live further up the road, and they're very private, but that's because Sikhs tend to be private, But their kids are all out in the street with everybody else. It's a very village atmosphere here, It's very alive. And you'll see the same thing. We see the same thing here. See the ladyboys. There's a couple of ladyboys just live two or three doors on the other side. Nobody bats an eyelid. And of course, Sam walks up down the street, and they don't even know. I don't even think they notice. It's like, why would you bother anyway? So what happened? One reason that there are so many ladyboys in cities in Southeast Asia is there are so many in the villages. And when they came to the cities to get work or whatever, and they became an urbanized society, they brought these habits with them. Of course, that didn't happen in the West. We don't know why. That might be an interesting subject to research. Now, I came across a very interesting piece the other day which talked about the Biniboys. Now, you may not have heard of the Biniboys, but the Biniboys, Bini is actually a Hindu word, and it means delicate or reserved. Okay? But the Biniboy was an older form of Ladyboy. It's non-anglicised. And the first mentions I could find of the Biniboys will date from the 1950s, just after the war. Obviously during the period of the Japanese occupation of World War II, everything's really up in the air. It's not easy to get any information about what's going on then because the place was under, armed camp, basically. But once things settled down, the Philippines became independent in 1946. It became stable, and people started moving to the cities again for work. You didn't move there during the war because it's full of Japanese. And one of the things that was happening was that young homosexual effeminate boys who existed in the villages would go to the cities. And this was largely to provide sexual services. One of the things it was. And they were called the Biniboys. They also worked in salons, hairdresser salons. They worked in cabarets. They worked in nightclubs. But they had a reputation for being involved in prostitution. Now, that might have been an undeserved or largely undeserved reputation, but it was there. And in 1953, I believe, we'll put a story up, but certainly in the 1950s, the Beanies were congregating in an area of Manila called Pasay. Pasay today is a hotbed of prostitution. There's a lot of prostitution there, but not so much of, the trans scene is not so prevalent there. But then they were apparently causing so much disruption that the police were sent out. It's the usual anti-trans stuff that you get, the usual transphobic nonsense. But this being the Philippines, and the Philippines are never going to take that kind of thing lying down. I mean, they just don't do it. You don't live here in the Philippines long without realising that these are people who will insist on their rights, whether you like it or not. Being a Scot, I really appreciate the way that Filipinos think, So they decided they were going to have a grand ball, this huge glamorous grand ball. And they would all dress up in their gowns and they would have this fantastic, society night for the Beanie Boys. And the local paper went along, and the picture that I'm showing you now, this is the picture they took on the night. And it's like, I think there's about 40 people in this. They're all girls, beautifully decked out. They were all born male, right? At the same time, the Beanie Boys were all over the place. And there's one story I came across, which is that a particularly well-known Westerner had a very fetching maid who lived in his house, and very few people realised that she was actually not a girl at all, and was apparently the best paid maid in Manila at the time. So this was happening in the 1950s already. You were seeing this agglomeration and this appearance of transsexual characters appearing in the big cities. They'd come from the villages, they'd moved in, they were young homosexual boys, they liked the company of men, they wanted sex with men. They moved here, they became girls, and they lived as girls. They got involved with men, and we don't really know what happened to them in the long term. It's unfortunate that these areas are not well recorded in Filipino history. It's difficult to find people who can tell you about them, partly because I think that there's that kind of conservative reluctance or reticence about these things. But, actually they shouldn't be, because it's a lovely thing. It's all a lovely thing. So what happened was that as time went by, these populations consolidated and they continued. And really we see exactly the same thing here now. Because like I told you, Filipino neighbourhoods in cities are just like villages, so there's a few ladyboys, right? And they'll be like, well, let's go uptown. So they get all dressed up and they go uptown, And most ladyboys in the Philippines are not working in the sex trade. That's a myth. That's much more the case in Thailand, but it's certainly not universal in Thailand either. But it's certainly not the case here. I mean, very few actually. I'm not saying they wouldn't turn a trick if there was some money or even a dinner in it, but they're not professional prostitutes. They don't do that. Most of them, if you see them uptown, I'm not saying they wouldn't go home with you. They probably would. In fact, I'm sure they would. But it's not the money's not the primary interest. They want men. It's like, I want a man. That's what I really, really want. Is I want a guy. And okay, fine. If there's some money in it, fine. That's okay. But mainly, I just want a guy. These are, by the way, the idea that prostitutes are always reluctant. By the way, when it comes to ladyboys, absolutely not. Don't even think that applies. They don't. I mean, they're keen. They're really keen, and they're very forward. They'll tell you exactly what they're interested in. It's not at all a secret. I mean, I'm protected because I have my little wonderful amulet called Sam, who stands beside me, and they know not to come close because they're not going to get in the way of somebody else. Most ladyboys I know are working in sari stores or in hairdressers. You know, some are working in cabaret or they do pageants professionally, and a few, well, that's what they do. They work as prostitutes. But it's not enough. That business is just not big enough to explain the numbers. There are huge numbers of ladyboys here, huge. Like I say, I can't go out the door, but I meet some, and I'm often wowed. You know, I had to go uptown this morning to get some cash. You know? Sitting waiting in the line for the cash transfer to come through at Cebuana, and looked around. Here's a blonde ladyboy, absolutely gorgeous, sitting with her friends. You know, they were getting a cash transfer. This is totally normal. You'd actually be surprised if you went out and you didn't see some. You know what I mean? It's like, what's wrong today? Where are they all hiding? And this, by the way, is 9:30 in the morning, and by and large, ladyboys don't really come out till it's night. You know, a lot of ladyboys are somewhat nocturnal, but no, you see them everywhere. So the idea that it's all about money, or it's gay boys who try to find money, that's just nonsense. That's not how it works at all. It is a genuine identification with a way of being. And like I said, you had the Albalario, you had the Biniboys, you had the Ladyboys today. And they're all really the same. And they come from this idea that if you have the sexuality, if you're born a boy and you have the sexuality of a woman, then you transition. Why would you not transition? I mean, there are what they call short-haired ladyboys, and those are what you might call, feminine gay boys here. But the only reason they have short hair is because their job prevents them from growing it out. If they change their jobs, they'll grow their hair. I have personally known girls who met them first, girl, right, long hair, dress, tiny miniskirt, the usual thing, legs that went on forever. Next time I met her, she's a guy, wearing slacks, short hair, nothing at all unusual. What happened? I got a new job, I have to dress like this. Met her again about a year after that, back to being a girl. Her hair was bob length by this stage. What happened? I lost that job, I got a different job. They don't mind. That's what's going on here. If you are a homosexual boy here, then your natural inclination is to turn into a girl. In fact, you see yourself as a girl. You don't see yourself as a boy. And if you ask any of them, even the short hairs, they'll say, in my heart I'm a woman, right? Or in myself I'm a woman. Sometimes in my soul I'm a woman. But the point is that they know that they're a woman inside. That's how they see it. And what makes them think that, they're women inside, is their attraction to men. Now we're going to talk about the non-homosexual forms another time because they do exist. But that's how the homosexual form, which is by and far the most commonly seen. I mean, there are plenty of non-homosexual or autogynephilic ladyboys around. But the most common one, you wander up Walking Street any evening, you wander out in the street, and something like that. The ones you're going to meet are HSTS. And the reason they are so numerous is, first of all, there is just no issue with being homosexual here. The whole of Southeast Asia doesn't have a taboo about homosexuality. It's just not an issue. And we might do a piece to discuss why that is the case. And it's quite clear why that is not the case in another piece. But at the moment, just understand it's just not an issue. Because a boy is attracted to men, he won't get flack from it. That's it. His father might resist. Don't be gay. But his mother will probably go, leave him alone. You know what I mean? And in the general society, that's not a problem. Some of the biggest stars in Philippine entertainment, Boy Abunda, Vice Ganda, they're openly and obviously gay. It's just no way that it could be seen as being taboo or undercover, anything like that. So, if you're gay here, you go, how quickly can I make myself a girl? That's what you do. There's none of this pretend the falsehood of the new gay man, so let's all pretend to be guys, you know, because we must hide our femininity, but be guy. It's absolute pish, it's horrible. It's just a function of Western homophobia. And the problem is that, you know, gay society, which is itself a function of homophobia, doesn't realise that the society it exists in, the Western society that it exists in, is utterly, utterly weird and a complete outlier, because that's just not how it is in most of the world. Most of the world is like here. Nobody gives a damn. So that's one reason. There's just no issue with homosexuality. And the other is that if you're pretty and you look good as a girl, right, then you'll be accepted as a girl. It's that simple. Girl, I'm not joking here, I've seen girls, to quickly give you an anecdote, a former girlfriend of mine, who was kind of forward, you know. She's a very sweet girl, but she was kind of forward. I remember watching her go up to a girl, a real girl, you know, and say to her, "You're wearing too much makeup. You're wearing too much makeup. You look Ladyboy," you know. And this poor girl's like, "What?" And I'm standing there waiting for the doo-doo to hit the fan, and everybody starts screaming and shouting. What? By the way, this is happening, you know, just outside the ladies' toilet that they'd both just come out of. And it's not that at all. The girl goes, "Oh, what do you think I should do then?" And the next thing I know, my friend is basically saying, "Well, you know, use this kind of makeup and a little bit of this and blah, 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 blah." Turns out that here, ladyboys are regarded as fashion gurus. Nobody knows how to make a girl look good better than a ladyboy does. So when it comes to fashion or hairdressing or styling of any kind at all, the girls are all like, "Yeah, ladyboy, yeah." There's absolutely no hostility. There's no possible. It's just the idea that there would be rejection is laughable. The only time you ever come across rejection of ladyboys in the Philippines, less so in other areas, but certainly in the Philippines, there's two occasions where you'll get rejection of ladyboys, and one is from our well-known friend, the Australian, who frankly would have been better left as a stain on his mother's bed sheets, and the other is from very strongly Catholic women who have this sort of sin thing. But they're very rare. In all these years, I've only ever come across that two times, that a woman was actually, and all they'll do is misgender the girl. They'll say "sir" instead of "madam." You know, but it's passive aggressive. It's very, very strong passive aggression. But you won't get, you know, homophobia or homophobic attacks. No, they don't exist. Anyway, that's enough rambling on for today. But that's why there are so many ladyboys in the Philippines. They've always been here. Always. And they ain't going away. Thankfully.